the sign. That's awesome.
You ready? All right, let's do it.
Only got 2 people.
All right, guys, welcome back to Quarantine Kitchen. Hopefully, as more people come on, get everybody involved. But ultimately, once again, got my sous chef Jonathan down here, my social distancing Sue.
How you doing, guys? Nice to see you all again.
All right, as you can see, Chef Weston here made his way back this week. So, like I said, we'll get the kids more involved as we go. That's what you should be doing at home as well with your family. Get your kids involved with cooking. Even with these guys, look, little plastic knives, it's a little bit serrated. Perfect way to start showing them how to cut. They're not going to cut themselves, all right? Cut the food, not yourself. All right, today, the name of the series is Will It Last? Okay, we're going to talk a little bit more about food preservation today. Okay, this isn't going to be full-on long-term food preservation. We're not talking things like canning necessarily, things that'll last a long, long time, but we're gonna say, hey, how can you get a little bit more time out of your food, but also how can you get a little bit more health and nutrition out of your food, and how can you also just get a little bit more flavor and diversity out of your food. So that's essentially what we're here today to talk about. So I'm gonna make a few things. I'm gonna kick it over to Jonathan. He's gonna be making a few things, but the first thing we're gonna talk about is sauerkraut. Okay, that's gonna be the first thing we're gonna talk about today. Sauerkraut is simply as simple as 2 ingredients, right? You have cabbage here, just good old green cabbage. You can use other types of cabbage, but green cabbage is a little bit more firm, so it works a little bit better. And just good old salt. Good old salt. All right. We have some people joining in.
Got about 7 people.
About 7 people. I like it. Who's on? Anybody good?
T.I. made it.
T.I.
Taylor.
Oh, Taylor made it?
Mm-hmm.
Taylor, I like your hair. I wish I could do that. So, all right. So cabbage, salt. That's the only 2 things you need to make sauerkraut. But the deeper thing that we're going to talk about is the process. The process of it is what's called lactofermentation. Lactofermentation is when you're going to add salt to it could be fruit such as like berries or stone fruit. It could be all sorts of different vegetables. It could even be things like peppers. Okay, if you want to make your own pepper sauce, it would be a great way to add to it. So essentially, you're going to either create a brine by taking salt and water and making a strong enough salinity to create a brine to do this in, or in the case of things like sauerkraut, you're just going to add the salt to the cabbage. You're going to mix it together, as I'll show you, and you're going to pull out moisture from the vegetables itself, and it's going to create its own brine. So let's get started here. Cabbage, I've already cut up a little bit. The most important thing you want to do, take off those outer leaves. You really don't want them. A lot of times there's like little blotches and stuff on the outside, so you can discard your outer leaves, okay? Or I'll show you what I'm going to do with one of them that I kept. Take out the core. Anytime you're cutting something, the best thing you can do is try to make it flat. So essentially what I do is I kind of take out the inside of the cabbage there and make it nice and flat on your surface. Now if you have a food processor and you can drop this into a food processor and make really thin ribbons, that's great. If you have a mandolin, also works really, really great. To me, if I'm doing a little bit of something though, to mess up a whole food processor or to have to clean a whole mandolin is a whole lot harder than just cleaning a knife. So that's why I like to do just a knife. So we're really just going for really, really, really thin ribbons. Okay. Doesn't really matter how long they are. Essentially, they're kind of fall apart a little bit and get crushed when we start the process. This bigger inside, I think it's a little bit easier to pick up the knife. Okay, and as you notice, I'm always trying to keep a flat surface when I'm cutting. I'm not trying to chop on something that's rolling around on me.
What is lactobacteria and what does it do to the cabbage in this specific case?
Cool. So what it is, okay, lactobacteria is a good bacteria, all right? So you usually hear like you have bad bacteria and good bacteria. In the case of this, what we're gonna do is we're gonna keep out the bad bacteria by salt, okay? Salt has always kind of been part of the curing process and things. And bacteria, or most kinds of bacteria, cannot live in a very salty solution or area. So that's gonna kill off the other one, or the bad bacteria. The other thing killing off the bacteria is lack of oxygen.
Hey,
so what you'll see, and I'll show you here in a minute, is
my light.
we're going to submerge this
Mommy.
all the way down into the liquid. Hey,
There you go,
go watch TV.
I want my light.
I know. See, he'll give it to you.
No, I don't want that kind of light.
So, but what you'll see is we're going to submerge it all the way underneath the liquid, so that way it cannot grow, or bad bacteria can't grow. And then instead, you're going to have an anaerobic bacteria like lacto, or lactobacillus, I believe is what it's called. And that's the bacteria that is going to thrive in this environment. And those are the things that are going to help preserve the cabbage. It's going to help give it like a really strong, almost kind of tangy flavor that's really popular with like krauts and whatnot. And that's because as this bacteria thrives, it's going to build up lactic acid. And as that lactic acid, or the longer you let this ferment, the more lactic acid is going to build up, and it's going to get tangier and tangier and tangier. So we'll keep going into some little tips and details on all that as we go. But really, the good general rule of thumb when it comes to making sauerkraut, or really any kind of lacto-fermented item, is 2 to 2.5%. That is what you need to know. 2 to 2.5% is a good basis of how to judge how much salt that you need to add whatever you're making. Okay, it doesn't matter whether it's fruit, doesn't matter whether it's something like cabbage. 2 to 2.5%. Usually I go a little bit higher if I'm worried about the potential of any kind of bad bacteria growing, but for the most part, 2 to 2.5%. So in this case, I will weigh it out just because it's the most accurate way to go. But I will say an average head of cabbage is about 5 pounds.
What?
Okay. With that being said, about 5 pounds is going to turn into about 3 tablespoons of salt. Now let's talk real quick about salt. I personally like kosher salt. Okay, the one thing you do not want to use in this case is iodized salt. Okay, so just regular table salt, like iodized salt, you do not want to use that. Biggest reason why, iodine can actually kill off some of the good bacteria as well, and then you won't get a complete fermentation. Okay? So now that we have the cabbage, I'm going to weigh it real quick. As we didn't forget, we're going to zero out our bowl here that we have.
Bub, come here. Come here. Oh, did you make a big mess?
No.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's 571 grams of cabbage. So 571 times 0.25, or sorry, 0.025. Okay, about 14.2 grams. So as you can see, in comparison, that much cabbage to only about, I'd say that's a little over a tablespoon right there of salt. That's really the only 2 ingredients. Now, very popular in things like sauerkraut is caraway. Okay, if you wanted to add a little bit of garlic, you could also add that as well. You could add a little bit of garlic, but just remember, in fermenting, anything that you add to it at this point, you have to be careful. Don't treat it like you would if you're cooking and you're like, oh, I'm gonna add a little bit of garlic into that. Okay, the flavor will intensify greatly. So when you start playing with fermentation, I say start small. Start small with all these flavoring and additions. Okay, I added just a little pinch of caraway seed there. Okay, at this point, you're just gonna go to town. As that salt incorporates with the cabbage, it's naturally going to pull out liquid from it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to let this sit here for a minute, because that's the other thing. Time can also pull out some of the liquid. So instead of just making you sit here and watch me do all that, I will let that sit there and we'll go back to that.
What are you doing?
Instead, at this point, one other thing you could do, if you do have a vacuum sealer, okay, I made this yesterday, and this is the same thing, same percentage, and as you can see, I didn't kind of have to play with it at all. I literally just put dry cabbage with the salt in there, and just by creating that same anaerobic environment, right, so no oxygen, I pulled all the oxygen out of here, and it already created its own brine. So, really easy way to do it. I would just say a few tips when you do it with a vacuum seal bag, and I say vacuum seal, you can do it with a gallon Ziploc bag. Just know that as the gas builds in this, if you don't kind of burp it on a regular basis, it runs the chance of exploding on you. To where with something that's a little bit more sealed, yeah, if you let it go too long, it would explode, but for the most part, you're really overall pretty safe. So really, that's the advantage of that. Another great thing is what's in a vacuum seal bag like this, it doesn't stink up the house, okay? The one thing with fermentation, it does have a tendency to add some unique smells to the house.
Mommy,
so this avoids all of that, okay?
Mom, Weston got some candy.
Hey, I'm doing something, so can you go play?
Oh,
Okay, after we're done. So essentially, as you can see, this is what I made just earlier today. And just by kind of macerating it in that salt, that's the brine that's already been created with it. Now, for whatever reason, when you get to this point where you want to jar up your cabbage, if it's not completely covered, go ahead and you can add a little bit of water if you need to kind of reach it to that crescent point. But this is a little leaf that I saved earlier, and one thing you can do is put this on top, and it just creates a little bit of a barrier between what you're making. Some people will use weights. Like you can use different weights and buy different weights. I think it's more of a hassle than anything. So what I'll do is just a little bit of water in a Ziploc bag, take it over the edge, and a little rubber band, and that'll essentially keep that cabbage submerged under that water. And that's what we talked about being the most important thing. You want to keep this in anaerobic state, right? You don't want it to the point where this comes to the top, because what will happen is as this sits at room temperature, it will start to grow mold and other things on top of it. So, speaking of, it's okay to see little things grow a little bit. If you see things like a little yeast build up, it's okay. You can kind of just scoop it off as it builds and throw it away. If you start to see mold, that really comes down to preference. Some people are brave and they'll just go ahead and scrape it off and keep going. I personally wouldn't recommend that. I would just say go ahead, throw that out and start over if you do see something like mold. Any other questions? Nothing coming across? Okay. So at this point, you would take this, put it somewhere in your house. You want to keep it between 60, 70 degrees. Okay? If it's too high, it will ferment really quickly and you won't get good results. And if it's too low, it's going to take way too long. I've really found over time the sweet spot is about 2 weeks. Okay? And what you can do is after about a week, okay, this is kind of like why I like this as well. It's kind of an easy access. Take it, taste a little bit of it. Okay? If it's too crunchy, usually if it's really salty still, it's not ready. It's not ready yet. Essentially what it does is as that lactic acid builds up, it'll kind of counter with that saltiness. So you'll notice that in the beginning it's salty, but over time it'll get less salty, and overall it'll just taste better. Okay. Any other questions about sauerkraut? No, nothing for today. Well, cool. I'm going to kick it over to Jonathan, and he's actually going to talk a little bit more about some lactofermentation he's been doing.
Shut the door.
Hi, Chef. So today we went ahead and decided to do something a little bit more right out of the refrigerator. I'm using a Giardiniera. Giardiniera is basically taking a bunch of vegetables. Giardiniera means garden in Italian. So it's taking a bunch of vegetables. Mine are out of the fridge. I just happen to have some carrots, cauliflower, garlic, some onion around. I'm going to go ahead and mix a couple of those ingredients together, chop them up. And similar to what you did, I'm going to rub them down with some salt. For those that don't have a vacuum sealer, food processing bag, we're going to just put it in a Ziploc bag. I'll show you how to do that real quick. So what I have here is just some onion, some cauliflower, some garlic, some carrot, and some spices. You can do these hot if you'd like to. Some people like to add peppers to it. Classically, Italians tend to throw a few peppers with it as well. Serranos or jalapenos work. If you like it hot, you can go hotter than that. Just go to what your preference is. I recommend doing this with any of the vegetables in your refrigerator. They're looking like they're going to start going south pretty soon. Just take all these vegetables here, put them into a Ziploc bag. What you want for the salt is about 2% salt to the rest of the vegetables, and that's going to get you to the ratio that Chef Kyle was already explaining. I'm not going to use any math here. I'm just going to do this really old world. So take your ingredients, put them into a bag, add, for this amount of vegetable, let's say no more than a teaspoon of salt. I'm going to add a little bit of Italian seasoning here. And I like my cauliflower to be a little bright orange with the Giardiniera, so much like a southern piccalilli, I'll add a little bit of turmeric to it. Sometimes people will add mustard seed, black pepper. You can really kind of play with it and make it your own. And all you're going to want to do is zip up your bag, try to get a lot of the air out. You're not going to be able to get all of it out. And then on your cutting board, just kind of mash the salt in with the vegetables. And what this is going to help do is macerate it, break open some of the pores in the vegetables, and kind of break down the cell walls. And once you got it to this point, you're going to just take it, wrap it up, leave it out on your counter. And about once a day, you're going to want to turn it, dash it with your hand a little bit, mix it back up, roll it back up, and leave it out on your counter again. That's it. After a few days, we're going to end up, well, this is only 2 days, and mine's produced a lot of juice now. All of this juice is going to become the pickling brine. This is from the salt weeping out the moisture out of the vegetables here. And it's going to create its own brine, so when it starts to really ferment and break down, you'll get a lot of liquid in here, and that's really where it's going to start to do its work. It's going to break down quite a bit. And what's happening now is the natural yeasts and bacteria that are in the vegetables and already on it, that just come from the air and the environment that it's in, growing in, those are going to start helping to break down this stuff. And the salt is going to provide an environment where it's safe, because the bad bacteria is going to be killed off by the salt. So these are all things that Chef Kyle explained before, but just to kind of break it down in some layman's terms, all you're doing is turning something funky and letting it decompose, but in a safe way. So it is, honestly, it's rotting, but this is a safe way to do it, and it provides its own juice and liquid to be able to preserve it for a long time. These are some pretty old world techniques, and chefs love them, and well, it just really enhances the flavor and changes the flavor of things to make it a little bit better, and well, it makes it keep, which is what we're doing here. Let it keep.
We do have one question. Have you ever made spicy sauerkraut? If so, what did you use to make it?
Yeah, so it could be as simple as jalapenos. I know a few jalapenos in with sauerkraut is a great way to just make it a little bit spicy. From there, you can kind of go up the pepper scale and make it as spicy as you want. Used everything from even gochujang, which is like a Korean pepper paste. That works really well. You'll see a lot more in, obviously, when you're leaning more towards kimchi, that's when you get a little more interested with different styles and techniques to make it a little bit more spicy. But definitely, spicy is a great way to add addition. And like we talked about earlier, you could do the same process with just jalapenos or serranos and allow that fermentation to take place. Blend it up in the blender with some of your fermentation liquid, and that's going to give you some amazing pepper sauce to have at home and to keep at home. You don't need to go buy this stuff. It's so simple to make. And essentially that's why we're doing this class today is, once again, a lot of people know about canning, but a lot of people don't know a lot about fermentation, or it seems kind of like a dangerous or something that's like, I don't trust it. But what we're here to show you is it's really easy. Like it's so simple to do. You can already see all the liquid that's coming off of this cabbage. Okay, and that nothing was added here. That was all within the cabbage in itself. So, and you know, one thing kind of like what Jonathan did is you can get it from the vegetable, but in some cases there's going to be vegetables where it's going to be a little easier to add salt to it, but just keep in mind you're going to want to have enough salinity in your solution so that way you're hoarding off or you're keeping off that bad bacteria. So, but essentially what I'll do is I'll add that to my jar that I have over there once we finish this class, and I'll let it go. And what I'll do is I'll post some pictures of the end results here in about 2 weeks.
Where am I going?
Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is continuation with using salt as a curing method or a process. So in this case, we're going to turn this beautiful paste of salmon into something that looks more like this, which is Gravlox. Okay, if you're not familiar with Gravlox, Gravlox is essentially smoked salmon, or has the same profile of smoked salmon, just not smoked, right? It still has that nice salty, sweet balance to it, but just doesn't have that smoky undertone with it. Once again, so easy to do. You don't need any equipment to do it. So this is what we're gonna do. I'll jump right into it. Salmon. Use fresh salmon, okay? When we're talking about curing things too, or preserving food, please don't think of it as an opportunity to, oh, this is about to go bad, let me fix it now. Like, no, you still need to use good ingredients, okay? Don't wait till your cabbage has all these little moldy spots on it, okay? Don't wait till your salmon starts to smell before you're like, oh yeah, I'll turn it into something else, okay? But the best thing you can do, the fattier the salmon, the better, or the fattier the fish in general. So if you're using any kind of fish, make sure you're using a fatty fish. But something like salmon works extremely well. I would say the best I've ever used is king salmon, just because it is extremely fatty. But I'll take good old Alaskan or Atlantic salmon, which I have here for you today. So very, very simple. You can make it as complex, just like with the kraut. You can add all different flavor and profiles to it, okay? But Gravlox essentially translates to buried or grave salmon, all right? So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna bury it. We're gonna bury it in two things here. We have salt and we have sugar. Totally up to you on flavor profiles, but it doesn't get much simpler than equal parts. Okay, if you like it a little bit sweeter, add more sugar. If you like it a little saltier, add a little bit more salt. But essentially equal parts is what a good ratio. Okay, mix that together. I personally, the only thing I really like to add is a little bit of lemon zest. Okay, by no means do you want to add lemon juice or lemon slices into this. Main reason for that is as you know, acids cook fish like a ceviche. You do not want to cook this fish. We're curing it at this point. Okay, and we want to do that with the sugar and the salt. If you were to do the acid in there, you're gonna completely change the protein structure of the salmon. But a little bit of zest still gives you that flavor.
Where's the gummies go, Mom? Where's the gummies go?
Right. So a little bit in there. Yep, perfect. Now, once again, if you have Cryovac or you have a vacuum seal bag, great opportunity. Throw some salt in there, throw your filet in, more salt on top, Cryovac it. It's going to be absolutely the easiest way to do it. If you don't, plastic wrap works fairly well too. Okay. Another thing you'll see is pretty popular is to use like fresh dill. Okay, I didn't have any fresh dill, so I'm not going to use any. It's very common to lay like a bed of fresh dill down, lay your mixture down. So we're going to lay about half this mixture down. Salmon on top. And like I said, the name is buried, so you want to make sure that thing is completely buried down.
Don't hit anybody. No, sir.
Completely buried down. Now, once again, another advantage of having a vacuum seal is it would put enough compression on here to where it would kind of keep that on the surface. Okay. You don't have to necessarily the same surface tension with something like this. So instead what we'll do is you can put it in a dish, maybe put even a towel on top, and then just some weight. And what that weight's gonna do, it's gonna keep that constant pressure on top of that salmon. And you're gonna notice the same thing's gonna happen a lot like what we saw really quickly with the cabbage. It's gonna expel a lot of liquid and it's gonna start pulling liquid out. And essentially that's what you're doing. That salt is pulling the liquid and curing the fish at the same time. Okay? Time, just like the fermentation, is to your preference. I personally do not like more than 24 hours. Some people, you'll see a lot of recipes online that'll say 3 days. It does depend on the thickness of the fish, but I mean, more than 24 hours, you start to lose kind of that integrity of the fish, and it really ends up being more hard than it is like a kind of a butteriness to it. So this would go into the fridge for 24 hours, take it out, rinse it off, and this is essentially what you would end up with. And as you can see, completely different dynamics of what the salmon looks like. Much more firmer, a lot of the liquid is out of it. And then the hardest part about making Gravlox is really about slicing it. So what I like to do, just take a nice sharp knife and kind of in one swipe, take it down. I cut it towards the skin here just because a little bit of this fat is good, but a lot of times, and you know if you eat salmon, it has a little bit of a bitterness to it, so I don't like a lot of it that sits right down on the flesh.
Mom, give me a bowl.
Okay.
Mom, give me a bowl. Give me a bowl.
As you can see here, you want it to be nice thin pieces, but absolutely delicious. Right here, I personally just like a little bit of toast, cream cheese, a couple slices of fresh tomato, some Gravlox, and a little cracked black pepper. That's good though, right? That's
Yeah,
good.
that looks great.
No.
I'm hungry.
Very, very simple stuff to do. Once again, you're gonna, instead of this sitting in your fridge, a piece of salmon, you know, usually you get about 3 days with fish in the fridge. This way, you're gonna get about 2 weeks with it. And if you have a vacuum sealer, probably about a month. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and kick it back on over to Jonathan again. He's gonna talk to you about limoncello.
All right, guys, I got one more cool little food preservation trip for you.
Stay down.
Alcohol. All right, a lot of people don't know this, but if you want to make vodka taste good at all, you got to add something to it. A little sugar, a little fruit. You can preserve fruit this way. This is kind of a fun little way to make some fun mixers, some cocktails. I know probably a little bored right now, sitting in quarantine. So this is a little good way to pass the time. So what we've got here is some alcohol. This is some vodka, local. And I took the peel of 10 different lemons and put them all into a jar. So put the peel of 10 lemons into the jar. I used 4 cups of vodka. And with the 4 cups of vodka, I wanted to do an equal amount of simple syrup. To make a simple syrup, I set aside 4 cups of water, 4 cups of sugar, and I set that up to a boil on the stove. And I just boiled it until the sugar was dissolved, stirring occasionally. In the meanwhile, I pour the vodka over the lemon peels, and I let that sit for 1 week. At the end of 1 week, I added that simple syrup to the vodka. And at that point, the limoncello is basically done. You may have to adjust every once in a while, depending on how strong your lemons are, how fresh they are, whether or not they're in season, with a little bit of water, just to dilute if you need to, or, you know, on your preference. Sometimes people don't like it quite as sweet. But eventually what you're left with is something that looks like this. So what I've got here is I use some natural sugar in my case, so you'll find that the color variety changes a little bit depending on the sugar you use. And again, like how ripe or what season your lemons are in. But all it is just some infused alcohol with lemon peels and then a simple syrup mixed together. And the best way to serve it is chilled. What I have here is a chilled glass. It's nice to put 1 or 2 of these in the freezer just in case for an occasion like this. Pour a little bit of this dessert for yourself. nice and frosty. When it's frosty, it's best. That's pretty good.
That looks good. Just limoncello.
Cheers.
You're saving me some of that, right?
I'm saving you some, Joe.
Okay, well, we'll see how long this quarantine thing lasts. We'll see how long it lasts. Cool. Thank you for that, Jonathan. All right, and so
hopefully not too long.
yeah, absolutely. So the next week we're going to talk about, once again, preservation. So dehydration. Also salt comes into play here, but it's more about dehydration that's going to come into effect. Did you just put that back in there? Okay, cool. Cool. So, venison jerky. Okay, this can work with any type of beef as well. Okay, or beef jerky. I particularly have a lot of venison right now. My family's from Kentucky. Last time they were down, they delivered a lot of venison and brought it with them. So that's what I'm going to use. You can really use any really lean meat. And I say lean meat because if you try to do anything like a ribeye that has a lot of intermuscular fat with it, that fat will essentially go rancid on you really, really quickly. It doesn't matter if you dehydrate it, it will still eventually go rancid. Fats go rancid really quickly in that matter. So we want lean meat. The great thing is venison is very, very lean meat. So there's not going to be a lot to take off of here. Okay. I would say if you're a beginner when it comes to jerky, something like flank steak works really well. Yes, it is more expensive than using something like a top round. You could easily use something like a top round instead. But I like to show people with like the grains in the meat. And that's what I'm going to show you here, if you can see it on here. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to take off some of this silver skin. So, as you can see, you want to get rid of all of the stuff right here.
Quit putting it back. Just eat it.
And a little bit's not going to hurt, especially because what we're going to show you today is essentially not going to dehydrate all of the way. So if you are wanting to take this all the way down to like fully dehydrated with almost no liquid or water left in it, you would want to take it all away. If you're looking like full preservation, the kind that we're going to make today we'll still want to keep in the refrigerator. It'll still last for a long time. We'll just want to keep it in the refrigerator. Okay. If you look here, kind of zoom in here really, really closely, you can see the grains in this meat are actually running this way. Okay. When it comes to jerky, you have two choices. You can cut with the grain or you can cut against the grain. I always like to cut against the grain because it's going to shorten those muscle fibers and it's going to make it a lot more tender. Now, if you're the kind of person where you like jerky to literally be like you have to rip your teeth out to be able to eat it, great. There's those people out there. Cut with the grain, okay? Instead, we're gonna cut against the grain. So if the grains are running this way, we're gonna go the opposite way. And essentially what you're looking for are just strips. They're gonna be about 1/8 to a 1/4 inch. I personally like to go as thin as possible. The best way to achieve that as well is what I did was about an hour ago, I put this into the freezer just to firm the meat up a little bit. This little nugget of fat here.
The bird wins, not the ladybugs on it. No, please.
Any questions out there in the world? No questions on jerky? Everybody's good? So, and I'll finish fabricating this here in a minute, but I just want to go ahead and I'll show you from there what a quick, simple, and my favorite little marinade that I'll put on here. So we'll start with a little bit of granulated garlic, and I'll post the recipe on Facebook so that way you have it. A little bit of Worcestershire, soy sauce, a lot of black pepper. I like really peppery, so some people will add spice or red chili or jalapeno. I don't love the spicy element, but I do like the peppery element, so that's why I add a lot of black pepper. A little bit of brown sugar for some sweetness, okay? And the best part, okay? There's no better reason to make an excuse to drink a beer, because guess what? You only need half a beer for this recipe. So that means you're gonna enjoy the other beer while you're waiting for your jerky to dry. Okay. Very, very simple. Mix it up. This will take this entire steak. This will be enough for about 1 pound to 1.5 pounds of meat.
Can we have a knife sharpening video?
Absolutely, we can have a knife sharpening video. Your best friend in the kitchen is actually this guy. A sharpening stone is important, but this guy is literally one of the most important things. And this is a steel, and essentially it keeps your knife sharp. It doesn't sharpen your knife, so it keeps it sharp. So if you don't use one of these now, I implore you, yes, I will do a sharpening video, but find this, whether you have to buy one or whether you have one sitting around your house somewhere, find this before we do that video, because this will help you along the way, okay? I very rarely have to sharpen my knives because I keep them sharp versus having to sharpen them, all right?
What if I wanted to add smoky flavor to my jerky?
If you want to add smoky flavor, you can by all means add a couple teaspoons of liquid smoke. What I'm going to show you, or what I'm going to tell you about today, is I like to put it directly onto my smoker. So I have a pellet smoker. Traditional smokers, it's going to be kind of hard unless you have a side box or you have some kind of cold smoker setup. It doesn't have to be absolutely cold, but my Traeger will get to about 180 degrees. The lowest your oven, most ovens get down to, is about 170. So there's really your 3 options. You can do it on something like a smoker, which I do mine at about 180 degrees for 3 hours. You can do it in the oven. Like I said, mine, the lowest it'll go is about 170. And when you're doing it on like the grill or the smoker or rack that you have on there is fine. If you're gonna do it in your oven, okay, something. You're doing it on like a grill or the smoker or a sheet tray with a rack, because you want to allow that air to circulate all the way around it. Don't just lay it flat on something. Or if you're fortunate enough to have something like a dehydrator here, you can absolutely do it in the dehydrator here as well.
What are you doing?
This guy.
What type of beer is best to go with this kind of recipe?
It just really depends. So the one I made yesterday, this batch I made yesterday, I did with a Blue Moon. I thought some of the little citrusy notes that are in Blue Moon would kind of be a good touch to it. But I prefer something like a Bock beer or something a little bit darker. Even a Guinness would be really, really, really good. Let this guy marinate about 6-8 hours. You could let it go overnight. Once again, it just really depends on how intense you want it. Take it out. You want to pat it dry. Okay, at that point, a lot of times I'll add some extra crackback black pepper on there. And then lay it out in your oven, on your smoker, in your dehydrator. It really just depends on how far you like to take it. Once again, do you like that really strong, like true, like you got to work it a little bit, or do you like it to be a little more tender? The stuff I made yesterday was by far a lot more tender. Okay, so your tender factor is going to come from how you cut it, and it's going to come from really how dehydrated it is. As you can see, it's got a little bit of a sheen to it, so there's still a little bit of moisture in there. I would highly recommend at this point you would still refrigerate something like this. Now, however, if I was going to plan on taking this on a trip with me, or it was going to be out at room temperature for a long time, I would just let it go for an extra hour or 2. Okay? It's going to pull out a lot more of that moisture, and that's going to be the deciding factor. What else do we have with beef jerky? Any other questions? Once again, it really comes down to preference when it comes to flavor profiles. So lots of great recipes, lots of great opportunities to enhance the flavors behind it. But we really just want to introduce you guys to all these different methods. So hopefully you feel better about being able to infuse alcohol. You feel better about doing some kind of lactofermentation and curing. Because as you saw right now, within 40 minutes, we just were able to make several things and at really no risk at all. So I just want to make sure to educate yourself when you do these things, but at the same time, get out there and try something new. I promise you, all of this is going to be much better than what you're going to buy out of the store, okay? Everything in the store completely filled with a lot of stuff that you don't want. Because that's the other preserving factor, is you can throw a lot of chemicals, you can throw a lot of additives in it. Yeah? I made bagels the other day, and guess what? By day 3, they weren't as good as if I would have bought them at the store and they were 3 days later. But guess what? They were a lot better day 1 and day 2 than I would have ever bought in the store. So make your own stuff. Any other questions?
Thanks.
Nothing?
Nothing. Quiet crowd today.
Quiet crowd today? Well, I appreciate everyone joining us today. Jonathan, anything else you have?
On the new quarantine logo, it looks like a few other people are too. I just want to say thank you again for the opportunity. This is such a pleasure to be able to do this, welcome you into my home, into my kitchen, and be able to share with you some of the things that we've got. Looking forward to next week, and stay tuned in the comments section for some of the recipes that we do.
Yeah, absolutely. As chefs, one of the best things that we are able to do is to be able to share what we know, and unfortunately right now we can't do that with a large captive audience unless we are depending on you guys each week. So it's something that we look forward to, and I hope you look forward to as well. Next week we're going to talk a lot more about butchery. So we're going to do some things with some chicken. So if you've ever been afraid of buying a whole chicken, if you know what spatchcocking a chicken is, we're going to talk about it more. If you don't know, it's going to save your life when it comes to cooking a chicken, okay? Nothing's better than a good spatchcocked chicken. So, all right, guys. Well, thanks again. Thanks for hanging out with us, and we look forward to seeing you next week. See ya.